Dalton Diaz was 43 and worked warehouse safety on the south side of Columbus, Ohio. Most people thought his wife, Vanessa Holloway Diaz, had carried him for years. He drove an old Ford F1, 5.0 packed cheese leftovers for lunch, and wore the same faded work jacket every winter. What they didn't know was that Dalton had quietly signed a multi-million-dollar ownership deal that same afternoon. At 11:43 p.m., his phone lit up with Vanessa's divorce party livestream. Behind her champagne glass glowed the Clear Lane Systems logo. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories about quiet men people underestimate, subscribe. Now tomorrow's story gets even deeper. Dalton Diaz woke up every morning at 4:50 a.m. without an alarm. The apartment was small, quiet, half-furnished. A temporary lease on the east side of Columbus near Bexley that still smelled faintly like fresh paint and cardboard boxes. He slept on a queen mattress without a headboard. 2 coffee mugs sat beside the sink. One of them still had Vanessa's lipstick stain on the rim from 3 weeks earlier. He never washed that one immediately. Not because he missed her, because he had stopped making emotional decisions months ago. Outside, February wind pushed freezing air through the apartment parking lot. Dalton stepped into it wearing worn work boots, dark jeans, and the same faded gray work jacket he'd owned for almost 8 years. The sleeve cuff was frayed near the wrist. The zipper stuck halfway if he pulled too fast. His truck waited under a thin layer of ice. A faded blue 2011 Ford F-150 with 214,000 miles on it. The passenger side door squeaked every time it opened. Vanessa used to hate that sound. She said it embarrassed her. Dalton drove west toward the warehouse district south of Interstate 70, while the sky was still black. Semi-trucks rolled through the cold like slow steel animals. Orange construction lights blinked along the highway barriers. Columbus looked different before sunrise. Cleaner, more honest. At 5:37 a.m., Dalton parked outside Mid-State Freight Logistics and walked through the employee entrance with a black thermos in one hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm. Nobody there knew who he really was. To them, he was just Dalton. Quiet Dalton, 50 guy Dalton, the man who checked forklift certifications and inspected loading ramps and reminded exhausted workers to wear back braces. He rarely talked about his life, and people filled silence with assumptions. By 8:15 a.m., Dalton was standing near Dock 14, reviewing an incident report when his phone vibrated. Vanessa. Again. He stared at the screen for 2 seconds before silencing it. Then another notification appeared. Instagram. Brittany Shaw had tagged him in a story. Dalton opened it without expression. A rooftop bar, loud music, white balloons. A neon sign glowed against the wall. New Life Era. Vanessa stood beneath it, in a white satin dress, smiling with a champagne glass raised toward the camera, while her friends screamed around her. Ladies, Brittany shouted into the phone camera. Vanessa is officially free. More screaming, more laughter. Then Vanessa leaned toward the camera. You know what the best part is, she said. I never have to pretend I'm okay with dating a warehouse guy ever again. The women behind her burst into laughter. Dalton watched the video once, then again, not because it hurt, because details mattered. He noticed the rooftop location immediately. The Joseph Hotel downtown. He noticed Brittany had tagged 12 people. He noticed the timestamp. He noticed Vanessa was already drunk enough to forget angles. Dalton locked his phone and slid it back into his pocket. "Everything good?" asked Hector Ruiz, one of the forklift supervisors. Dalton looked up calmly. "Yeah?" Hector nodded slowly. Most people stopped asking Dalton personal questions after a while. He gave short answers without sounding rude. It made people think he either had nothing going on or too much going on. Both were partially true. At noon, Dalton sat alone in the warehouse break room, eating leftover chicken and rice from a plastic container with a cracked lid. Across the room, two younger workers scrolled through TikTok. One of them laughed suddenly. "Bro," he said, "look at this divorce party." Dalton kept eating. The kid rotated the screen toward his friend. It was Vanessa again. "Imagine clowning your husband like this online," the second guy said. "She said he worked in a warehouse," the first replied. "Dude probably deserved it." More laughter. Dalton took another bite without reacting. Years earlier, comments like that might have bothered him. Not anymore. Because Dalton understood something most people never learned. Public opinion moved fast. Paperwork moved slower. But paperwork lasted longer. At 3:40 p.m., his shift ended. Most days, Dalton drove straight home. Not that day. He parked beside a brick office building near the Scioto Mile downtown and entered through a side security entrance with a digital key card. The receptionist looked up immediately. "Good afternoon, Mr. Diaz." Dalton nodded once. The elevator opened onto the 12th floor. Clear lane systems, minimalist lettering on smoked glass walls, quiet offices, dark wood floors, screens filled with freight analytics and compliance maps. This was the part of Dalton's life Vanessa never understood. For 5 years, he had helped build clear lanes systems from almost nothing. Not publicly, not loudly. Noah Bennett handled investors' interviews, conferences, and magazine profiles. Noah looked the part. Expensive suits, confident smile. Former regional operations executive for a national freight chain. Dalton built the invisible side, regulatory structures, compliance architecture, federal transportation filings, acquisition protections, risk exposure models. He worked nights for years because startups burned money fast and Dalton refused to gamble stability on ambition alone. So he kept the warehouse job. Health insurance, predictable income, low visibility. Vanessa saw it as weakness. Noah saw it as discipline. Inside conference room B, Noah tossed Dalton a bottle of water. "You look tired," he said. Dalton sat down. Long day. Noah studied him for a second. "You tell Vanessa yet?" Dalton unscrewed the bottle slowly. "No." Dalton Noah said carefully, "You own part of a company about to close a 9-figure acquisition." Dalton said nothing. "You can't keep pretending to be invisible forever." Dalton leaned back slightly. "It's temporary," he said. Noah almost laughed. "You've been saying temporary for 4 years. On the screen behind them sat the final acquisition documents with Buckeye Freight Capital. Pending signature completion, pending compliance review, pending public announcement. Dalton stared at the documents silently, millions of dollars tied to his name. And Vanessa thought he was secretly losing money in crypto forms. The irony no longer amused him. At 6:18 p.m., Dalton left Clear Lane and drove back toward his apartment through downtown Columbus traffic. Rain had started falling lightly across Broad Street. His phone buzzed again. Another tag, another party video. This one was different. Vanessa stood beside Brittany, near a long white table covered in champagne bottles and silver decorations. "Best decision I ever made," Vanessa said loudly. "I wasted 12 years trying to motivate a man who was comfortable staying average." The women around her cheered. Then Brittany held up a digital invitation card toward the camera. "Divorce. Freedom. Rooftop party. Vanessa Holloway." Dalton stared at the screen a little longer this time. Not because of the insult, because Vanessa was holding his black leather briefcase in the background. The same briefcase he had left near the closet during the move-out. The same briefcase containing internal Clear Lane acquisition drafts. The rain tapped harder against the windshield. Dalton pulled the truck onto the shoulder beside a dark gas station off Livingston Avenue. Then he picked up his phone and called Evelyn Mercer. The company's general counsel answered on the second ring. "Knew you'd call eventually," she said. Dalton looked back at the frozen image on his screen. Vanessa smiling, the briefcase behind her, and the beginning of something much worse. The rooftop of the Joseph Hotel overlooked downtown Columbus like a glowing stage. Glass railings reflected city lights across wet black marble. Heat lamps burned beside white leather couches. A DJ near the rooftop bar mixed slow club music, while servers in black uniforms carried trays of champagne through the crowd. Vanessa Holloway Diaz stood in the center of it all, wearing a fitted white satin dress with silver heels that clicked sharply against the floor every time she turned for another camera. Everything about the party was designed to be seen online. The balloon wall, the neon sign, the custom cocktails named Fresh Start and Single Again. Even the cake had been positioned carefully beneath professional lighting. White frosting, gold trim. One sentence written across the center in black icing. "Finally, free from Dalton." Phones surrounded her from every angle. Instagram Live, TikTok clips, boomerang videos, short interviews from friends pretending to host a red carpet event. Vanessa smiled through all of it, with the confidence of someone who believed public attention was the same thing as power. At 8:42 p.m., Brittany Shaw raised her glass and shouted loud enough for nearby tables to turn and stare. To Vanessa, she yelled, for surviving marriage to the human version of expired oatmeal. Laughter exploded across the rooftop. Vanessa bent forward, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her drink. One of the women filming asked so. What was the final straw? Vanessa took the microphone-shaped champagne bottle from her friend dramatically. "He was comfortable being average," she said. "That was the problem. More cheering." "Like," Vanessa continued, "I'm trying to build something. Brand deals, events, networking." Meanwhile, Dalton was excited because his warehouse gave him a $5 Starbucks card at Christmas. The crowd laughed again, A few people looked uncomfortable, not many. Most were too entertained. Several stories later, Vanessa stood beside the rooftop fire pit while Brittany filmed vertically for TikTok. "Tell them what he drives," Brittany said. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "A truck older than some interns. And his clothes. Same 3 gray jackets on rotation." "What about date nights?" Vanessa lifted her drink. "Applebee's if we were lucky." Another wave of laughter. The city wind pushed loose strands of hair across Vanessa's face, while comments flooded the live stream. "You deserve better. Girl, you glowed up. Broke men are exhausting." Vanessa read them out loud, smiling. Each comment fed something restless inside her. "Is that apartment 4, B, on the east side of Columbus?" Dalton sat alone at a small kitchen table under dim overhead lighting. His laptop remained open beside untouched paperwork from Clearlane Systems. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Dalton watched every clip without changing expression. Not because the words didn't land, because emotion without control created mistakes. And Dalton had spent years training himself not to make expensive mistakes. He downloaded every live stream automatically using a screen recording program Noah Bennett had recommended years earlier for compliance archives. Timestamp, username, platform, file backup. He organized them into folders, while Vanessa continued turning their marriage into entertainment for strangers. At 9:11 p.m., another video appeared. This one lasted only 18 seconds. But Dalton replayed it 6 times. Vanessa sat on a white couch near the rooftop bar laughing with Brittany and Kayla Monroe, an influencer from Cincinnati, known for messy relationship content. A black leather briefcase rested beside the couch. Dalton's briefcase. His eyes stopped moving. The same silver combination lock, the same scrat across the bottom corner from years earlier at Mid-State Freight. Kayla pointed toward it, jokingly. "What's in there?" she asked. "Secret broke husband documents." Vanessa smirked toward the camera. "Probably warehouse spreadsheets," she said. Then she pulled the briefcase onto her lap. Dalton leaned forward slowly. His apartment suddenly felt much quieter. Vanessa spun the combination lock absent-mindedly, while Brittany laughed behind the camera. "Maybe there's secret debt in there," Brittany joked. Vanessa opened the case halfway, only halfway. But halfway was enough. A stack of printed acquisition drafts became visible beneath the rooftop lights. Clearlane Systems letterhead, compliance schedules, Buckeye Freight, capital review pages, internal signatures. Dalton's jaw tightened for the first time that night. The camera shifted suddenly as Kayla laughed too hard and bumped into Brittany. But before the video ended, one frame held still just long enough. Long enough to read Clearlane Systems Acquisition Compliance Review. Dalton paused the screen, zoomed in, took screenshots, then leaned back slowly in his chair. Outside rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Inside, his phone buzzed non-stop with new notifications. Friends tagging him, co-workers from the warehouse, sending awkward messages. Unknown numbers. He ignored all of them. Instead, he opened another clip. Vanessa now stood near the rooftop edge, speaking directly into a phone camera, while downtown Columbus glowed behind her. "You know what's funny?" she said. "People keep acting like divorce is tragic. Sometimes divorce is an upgrade." Comments flooded upward. "Say it louder." "Upgrade season." "Queen energy." Vanessa smiled at the validation. Then she said something that made Dalton stop breathing for half a second. "I spent 12 years funding potential," she said. "Meanwhile, he was hiding paperwork around the house, pretending he was important." Dalton closed his eyes briefly. Not from anger, calculation. Because now, it wasn't only humiliation. Now she had publicly connected herself to company documents, potentially confidential ones. And she had done it online, with timestamps, with witnesses, with recordings already spreading beyond her control. At 9:26 p.m., Dalton's phone rang. Noah Bennett. Dalton answered immediately. "You watching this?" Noah asked without greeting. "Yes." A short silence followed. Noah sounded different than usual. Less polished. Sharper. "How much did she show?" "Too much." "Can you confirm the documents?" Dalton looked again at the paused frame. "Yes." Another silence. Then Noah lowered his voice. "Evelyn already knows." That surprised Dalton slightly. Clear Lane's general counsel, Evelyn Mercer, rarely reacted emotionally to anything. But she reacted fast. "She called me 20 minutes ago." Noah continued. "Somebody forwarded her the live stream." Dalton rubbed one hand slowly across his forehead. "I left the briefcase in the closet during the move." Noah exhaled heavily. "That's not your biggest problem anymore." Dalton knew he was right, because once confidential material touched public social media, intent stopped mattering. Exposure mattered. At 9:41 p.m., another clip appeared online. This one hit differently. Vanessa sat cross-legged on the couch while Brittany filmed nearby. The briefcase remained open beside her now, several papers partially visible. One comment on the live stream asked, "Wait, is your ex secretly rich?" Vanessa laughed instantly. "Oh my God, no," she said. "Dalton likes pretending he's involved in business stuff. It's probably fake startup paperwork." Then she lifted one page carelessly toward the camera. Not enough to fully read, but enough. The Clear Lane logo reflected brightly beneath the rooftop lighting. Dalton stared at the screen for several long seconds. He felt something cold settle quietly into place inside him. Not rage, not humiliation, distance. The emotional kind. The kind that arrived when a person finally understood there was no fixing what stood in front of them. He opened his cuttings, scrolled once, and pressed call. Evelyn Mercer answered immediately. "Dalton," she said calmly. In the background, he could hear keyboard typing and muted office voices. She was already working. "You saved everything?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." Dalton looked again at Vanessa, laughing beneath the rooftop lights, while strangers online praised her cruelty, like performance art. Then he noticed something else in the corner of the video. A man near the bar recording everything from another angle. Not one of Vanessa's friends. Someone else. Someone who could repost it anywhere. Dalton's voice became very quiet. She doesn't understand what she just did. Evelyn's response came instantly. No, she said. But by tomorrow morning she will. At 10:07 p.m., Dalton parked outside his apartment building but never went inside. Rain streaked across the windshield while downtown Columbus glowed faintly in the distance. The engine idled quietly beneath him. His phone rested face up on the center console beside a growing folder of downloaded videos. Every few seconds, another notification appeared. New repost, new comment, new tag. The internet was doing what it always did, spreading humiliation faster than facts. Dalton ignored all of it and focused on the details that mattered. Which videos clearly showed the briefcase? Which frames exposed documents? Which usernames had reposted the content? That was where his mind naturally went under pressure. Structure. Containment. Damage assessment. At 10:11 p.m., Evelyn Mercer joined the secure video call. Her office lighting was dim, except for two monitors glowing behind her. Rows of legal binders lined dark shelves across the back wall. She wore the same charcoal blazer she had been wearing during the acquisition review meeting earlier that afternoon. Unlike most corporate attorneys Dalton had met over the years, Evelyn never wasted words trying to sound important. "Screen share," she said immediately. Dalton obeyed. He played the rooftop clip again. Vanessa laughing. Brittany filming. The briefcase opening beneath rooftop lighting. Evelyn paused the frame instantly. "There," she said. Her cursor circled the top corner of a document, barely visible inside the case. Buckeye Freight Capital. Acquisition timeline draft. Internal compliance routing numbers. Nothing catastrophic by itself, but enough to create legal exposure if distributed publicly. Evelyn zoomed in further. "Play the next clip." Dalton opened another recording. This one showed Vanessa lifting a document halfway toward the camera while joking about fake startup paperwork. Evelyn froze the image again. For the first time since joining the call, her jaw tightened slightly. "How many people watched the live stream live?" she asked. "Last I checked, around 1,800. And reposts still climbing." Evelyn leaned back silently for several seconds. Behind her calm expression, Dalton recognized the shift immediately. Corporate calculation. Not emotional reaction, legal prioritization. "What exactly was inside the briefcase?" she asked. Dalton answered carefully. "Compliance drafts, internal acquisition timelines, some financial projections, nothing fully executed, any personally identifiable information, banking structures, partial references, vendor exposure, limited." Evelyn nodded once. "That helps." Dalton rubbed one hand slowly across his face. "This is my fault," he said quietly. Evelyn dismissed the statement immediately. "No," she replied. "Leaving a briefcase in your own house is not misconduct." Dalton looked away from the screen briefly. It no longer felt like his house. Not really. The split had started months earlier, long before Vanessa filed papers, long before the rooftop party, long before strangers online turned his marriage into comedy content. The silence stretched for a few seconds before Evelyn spoke again. "Dalton," she said calmly, "I need you focused." He looked back at the screen. "This situation is now divided into two separate issues." She continued, "Your divorce and corporate exposure. We do not combine those." That was one thing Dalton respected about Clear Lane's legal department. Precision, no theatrics, no emotional language, just lines, clear ones. "You're still protected under the operating agreement," Evelyn said, "but the company has a duty to respond if confidential material was displayed publicly." Dalton nodded once. "I understand. Good. Now I need every file." Within minutes, Dalton began uploading folders through Clear Lane's encrypted legal server. Video recordings, screenshots, timestamps, links, usernames. Evelyn organized everything in real time while speaking to someone else off screen. Probably another attorney. Probably already building preservation notices. The process moved fast. Faster than Vanessa could understand. At 10:38 p.m., another repost surfaced online. This one came from a Columbus gossip account with nearly 90,000 followers. The clip had been edited dramatically. Zoom-ins, captions, laugh tracks. One line across the screen read, "She divorced him after finding his secret business documents." The comments exploded immediately. Bro was probably running a scam. "That briefcase looks important. Why does a warehouse have corporate files?" Dalton stared at the screen silently. Then another comment appeared. "Wait. Clear Lane Systems is real." His eyes narrowed slightly. Someone recognized the logo. That changed things. Evelyn saw the same comment instantly. "How public is your role internally?" she asked. "Very limited. Outside the company, no public disclosures yet. Any SEC-linked documentation. Not under my name publicly." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good." But Dalton could tell she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Because if the acquisition leaked early, Buckeye Freight Capital could delay closing. If investors sensed instability, negotiations could change. If competitors got access to projections or timelines, the damage multiplied. And all of it started because Vanessa wanted applause from strangers. At 10:52 p.m., Noah Bennett joined the call. He appeared exhausted. Tie loosened. Office empty behind him. "Tell me we're containing this," he said. Evelyn answered first. "We're preserving evidence. That's not what I asked." Evelyn held his gaze evenly. Then no, not yet. Noah muttered something under his breath and sat down heavily. Dalton remained quiet. Noah looked toward him through the screen. "You okay?" Dalton considered the question honestly. "Yes," he answered. And strangely, it was true. Not because the situation didn't matter, but because something inside him had gone still, clear. He thought back to earlier years with Vanessa, before social media branding, before influencer parties, before every restaurant meal turned into staged photography. There had been quieter years once. Apartment dinners, shared grocery lists, late-night drives through Ohio suburbs while snow hit the windshield. But over time, Vanessa stopped valuing things she couldn't display publicly, and Dalton stopped explaining himself to someone who only respected visible status. Neither happened overnight. That was the dangerous part. Most collapses happened slowly, before they became obvious. At 11:06 p.m., Evelyn received another forwarded clip. This one was worse. Vanessa stood beside Brittany near the rooftop bar, while music blasted behind them. Brittany laughed and asked, "So what does your ex even do?" Vanessa took another drink. "I honestly don't know," she said carelessly. "Some compliance thing. He acts like he works for the FBI." More laughter. Then Brittany pointed toward the open briefcase. "Maybe we should auction the papers online." The women laughed again. Dalton watched Evelyn's expression flatten completely. That reaction worried him more than anger would have, because calm attorneys became dangerous when evidence organized itself. Evelyn paused the clip carefully. "Did she remove anything from the briefcase?" she asked. "I can't tell. We'll assume yes until proven otherwise." Noah leaned forward. "Can we shut the posts down tonight?" "Not immediately," Evelyn replied. "But we can begin formal preservation and notification procedures." Dalton already understood what that meant. Certified legal notices, litigation holds, evidence retention demands, potential civil exposure, everything documented, everything time-stamped. The internet moved fast. Law moved slower. But law arrived with permanence. At 11:19 p.m., Dalton finally exited the truck and walked into his apartment building, carrying his laptop bag under one arm. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead. Inside apartment 4B, he set the bag down near the kitchen counter and looked around quietly. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than before. Not sad, just temporary. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct message request from a stranger. The message contained only one sentence. "Bro, your wife accidentally leaked acquisition documents live." Dalton locked the screen without responding. Then Evelyn's voice came through his Bluetooth headset once more. "We move first thing in the morning," she said. Dalton stood beside the dark apartment window, overlooking wet Columbus streets. "And Vanessa?" he asked quietly. Evelyn did not hesitate. "The company will handle her formally." Outside, rain continued falling across the city. Inside the apartment, Dalton finally understood something clearly. Vanessa thought she had embarrassed a quiet warehouse husband online. What she had actually done was trigger a corporate legal response backed by a 9-figure acquisition team. And she still had no idea how serious that was. Dalton Diaz slept for less than 3 hours. At 5:12 a.m., he sat alone at the small kitchen table in his apartment while darkness still covered Columbus. A single overhead light reflected off stacks of printed screenshots, spread carefully across the surface. Instagram clips, TikTok reposts, timestamps, comment sections. Legal exposure maps Evelyn Mercer's team had already started annotating overnight. The coffee beside Dalton had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. He never noticed. Outside, freezing rain coated the parking lot in thin sheets of ice, while traffic moved slowly along Main Street. Inside the apartment, Dalton organized evidence with the same quiet focus he used during compliance audits. Emotion could wait. Documentation came first. At 6:03 a.m., his phone buzzed. "Evelyn, they've started deleting posts," she said immediately. Dalton leaned back slightly. "Too late." "Yes." Her tone remained calm. Everything was archived before removal. Legal preservation notices are already drafted. Dalton nodded once, even though she could not see him. He looked down at another printed screenshot. Vanessa smiling beneath rooftop lights. Thousands of strangers praising her cruelty. A year earlier, that image might have destroyed him emotionally. Now, it mostly exhausted him. Not because he no longer cared, because somewhere during the last 2 years of marriage, he had quietly accepted that Vanessa only respected visible success. And Dalton had hidden his real success too long for someone like her to believe in it anymore. At 7:15 a.m., Dalton drove downtown instead of heading to Mid-State Freight. Rainwater sprayed beneath the tires of his old Ford, while gray clouds hung low over Columbus skyscrapers. He parked beside a narrow brick building near Franklin County Court. Pike and Rutledge Family Law. The brass sign outside looked older than Dalton's truck. Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper files and burnt coffee. No giant glass lobby, no modern furniture, just shelves filled with legal binders and framed court victories dating back 20 years. A receptionist with silver glasses looked up. Mr. Diaz. Dalton nodded. "Mr. Pike is waiting." Graham Pike's office sat at the end of a narrow hallway. The attorney looked exactly like the office itself. Older, unpolished, solid, gray hair cut short, navy sweater instead of a suit jacket. Reading glasses balanced low on his nose while he reviewed paperwork spread across a heavy oak desk. He stood when Dalton entered. "Morning." Dalton shook his hand once. No dramatic introductions followed. That immediately earned Dalton's respect. Graham gestured toward a chair. "You brought records." Dalton placed a thick folder on the desk. "Everything I could gather overnight. Bank statements, mortgage payments, joint account histories, tax returns, credit reports, screenshots, insurance records, utility bills." Graham opened the folder and began reviewing silently. The room remained quiet, except for pages turning. Dalton watched him carefully. Experienced attorneys behaved differently than television lawyers. Less talking, more noticing. After nearly 10 minutes, Graham finally looked up. "You paid most household expenses," he said. "Yes." "Mortgage?" "Yes." "Utilities?" "Mostly." "Health insurance?" "Yes." Graham nodded slowly. "What did she contribute?" Dalton answered honestly. "Some income from brand partnerships, social media promotions, event work, but inconsistent." "Yes." Graham continued reviewing. There was no judgment in his expression, only pattern recognition, a legal mind building structure from evidence. Finally, he leaned back slightly. "She's building a public narrative," he said, "but the financial records don't support it." Dalton remained quiet, because that sentence summarized his marriage better than anything else could. Narrative versus records. Appearance versus documentation. Online perception versus actual responsibility. Graham tapped one screenshot lightly. The image showed Vanessa laughing beside Dalton's briefcase. "You understand. This changes things," Graham said. "Yes." "Good. Because family court judges hate social media stupidity." Dalton almost smiled at that. Almost. At 8:34 a.m., Graham reviewed the rooftop videos directly from Dalton's laptop. He watched each one fully. No interruptions, no emotional reactions, only occasional pauses to take notes. When the clip showing Clear Lane documents appeared, Graham froze the frame immediately. How public is this company? Not fully public yet. Your role, not announced. Graham stared at him for a second longer. You own equity. Yes. How much? Dalton hesitated briefly. Graham noticed. "Mr. Diaz," he said calmly, "I can't protect what I don't understand." Dalton finally answered. "A little over 12%. The office went quiet. Even Graham stopped writing for a moment. "That's substantial." "Yes." "And your wife thinks you're broke." Dalton looked toward the rain-covered office window. "She thinks I stayed small on purpose." Graham nodded once. "Did you?" Dalton considered the question carefully, then answered honestly. "Yes." Because invisibility had advantages. People ignored quiet men. Investors overlooked them. Competitors underestimated them. Even Vanessa stopped asking questions eventually. At first, she complained about Dalton working late. Then she mocked it. Then she stopped noticing entirely. And Dalton let that happen. Not out of manipulation, out of caution. Clear Lane had survived its first years because very few people knew how valuable it might become. At 9:12 a.m., Evelyn Mercer joined by conference call. Her voice filled the office speaker clearly. "Morning, Graham. Counselor." No weighted pleasantries. Graham summarized what he had reviewed. Financial imbalance. Public humiliation content. Potential reputational damage. Then Evelyn outlined the corporate side. Clear Lane will proceed separately, from the divorce matter, she said. But evidence overlaps. Graham nodded slowly. Any indication she distributed actual documents, not confirmed yet, but possible. Yes. Dalton listened quietly, while the two attorneys built legal boundaries around the situation. For the first time since the rooftop party, he felt something unaffected, relief. Not because things were getting easier, because structure was replacing chaos. There were procedures now, timelines, documentation, people who understood systems stronger than public opinion. At 9:47 a.m., Graham closed the financial folder. She spent heavily, he observed. Dalton nodded. Luxury salons, designer purchases, travel, furniture financed through payment plans, brand image expenses disguised as business investments. Graham flipped another page. She also opened 2 credit cards you weren't aware of. Dalton frowned slightly. What? One under a joint mailing address. Another connected to household expenditures. Dalton stared at the paperwork. This part he truly had not known. Graham slid the pages across the desk. Balances totaled nearly $38,000, mostly lifestyle purchases, boutique hotels, event deposits, retail spending. Dalton exhaled slowly through his nose. Not anger. Recognition. The marriage had been financially collapsing long before the divorce party. He just hadn't wanted to see it fully. At 10:16 a.m., Evelyn spoke again through the speakerphone. The legal notice is finalized. Dalton looked up. What happens now? Evelyn answered plainly. We formally notify her to preserve all evidence, remove unauthorized content, and cease further dissemination of company material. And if she ignores it, a brief silence followed. Then Evelyn replied, Then escalation becomes very expensive. No threats, no dramatic language, just facts. That was somehow colder. At 10:41 a.m., Dalton finally stood to leave. Graham handed him a business card. 2 pieces of advice, the attorney said. Dalton waited. First stop reading comments online. Dalton nodded slightly. Second, Graham continued, quiet men usually make one mistake during divorce. What's that? They wait too long to understand they're already in a fight. Dalton absorbed the sentence silently. Outside rain still covered downtown Columbus in gray reflection. He paused beside his truck before climbing in. His phone buzzed again, another notification from social media. Another repost of Vanessa's party. But now, something had changed. Yesterday, the videos looked like humiliation. Today they looked like evidence. Dalton unlocked the truck door slowly. Then his phone rang. Evelyn Mercer again. It's sent, she said. Dalton looked across the wet city street. Did she receive it already? Not yet, Evelyn replied calmly, but she will soon. At 11:18 a.m., Vanessa Holloway Diaz sat beneath soft salon lighting in Dublin, Ohio, while a stylist curled sections of her hair for a sponsored brunch event later that afternoon. The salon smelled like expensive shampoo and eucalyptus oil. Pop music played quietly through ceiling speakers, while women in cream-colored robes sipped cucumber water and scrolled through Instagram. Vanessa sat near the front mirrors wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors. Her phone rested in her lap. Notifications continued flooding in. Followers climbing. Comments exploding. Messages from strangers calling her iconic. She smiled every few seconds while pretending not to. Across from her, Brittany Shaw leaned back in another salon chair, laughing at TikTok reactions from the divorce party. Oh my God, Brittany said, turning her screen around. This one has almost 80,000 views already. Vanessa grinned. Which one? The Applebee's joke. Vanessa laughed softly and shook her head. I swear people love honesty. Not honesty, performance. But online the difference barely mattered anymore. A stylist adjusted Vanessa's curls carefully. So, are you really getting divorced? She asked casually. Vanessa smirked toward the mirror. Already filed. Was he upset? Vanessa paused just long enough to appear thoughtful. Dalton doesn't really react to things, she said. That was always the problem. At 11:26 a.m., the salon receptionist approached carefully, holding a FedEx overnight envelope. Vanessa Holloway, she asked. Vanessa looked over. That's me. Priority delivery. Vanessa accepted it, absent-mindedly, while still checking comments online. The envelope felt heavy, professional. Her smile faded slightly when she saw the return address. Clear Lane Systems Legal Department. Brittany leaned forward immediately. What is that? Vanessa laughed once. Oh my God, she said. Dalton is being dramatic. She slid one manicured nail beneath the seal and opened the envelope casually. Then stopped moving. Inside sat a thick packet printed on heavy white paper. Corporate letterhead. Formal formatting. Legal language. The first page read, Notice of Preservation of Evidence. Cease and desist demand. Vanessa's expression changed slowly. Not fear, yet. Confusion first. Then irritation. What Brittany asked. Vanessa skimmed faster. The salon noise around her suddenly felt distant. The document referenced unauthorized dissemination of confidential corporate materials, preservation obligations regarding electronically stored information, potential civil liability, mandatory retention of deleted content, immediate removal demands. The words became colder with every paragraph. By page 3, Vanessa had stopped pretending this was funny. Brittany reached for the pour. Let me see. Vanessa handed them over stiffly. Brittany's smile disappeared halfway through the second page. Oh. The stylist quietly stepped away, pretending not to listen. Vanessa grabbed her phone immediately and opened Dalton's contact. Call. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail again. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. He's trying to scare me, she muttered. But even she no longer sounded convinced. Because this didn't look personal. It looked corporate. Clean. Precise. Expensive. At 11:41 a.m., another woman in the salon glanced toward Vanessa carefully, then another. News traveled fast in rooms like that, especially when legal paperwork appeared. Vanessa snatched the documents back from Brittany and continued reading. One paragraph made her stomach drop slightly. Failure to preserve relevant electronic evidence after receipt of this notice may constitute spoliation. What the hell is spoliation? Brittany whispered. Vanessa ignored the question. Her phone buzzed. Kayla Monroe. Vanessa answered immediately. Hey, Kayla said. Why are people saying lawyers are involved? Vanessa stood abruptly from the chair. 1 second. She walked toward the front windows, away from the others. Outside, freezing rain streaked across the shopping plaza parking lot. This is ridiculous, Vanessa said quietly. Dalton's pretending his fake little company matters. Kayla hesitated. Vanessa? Clear Lane is real. Vanessa frowned. What? I looked them up. A pause. They just partnered with some freight investment group last quarter. Vanessa felt something uncomfortable move through her chest. Not panic, not fully, but instability. The kind that appeared when certainty cracked slightly. He never told me anything, she said. Maybe, because you kept mocking him online, Kayla replied carefully. Vanessa's expression hardened immediately. Oh, please. Everybody jokes online. Kayla did not answer right away. That's not really what this looks like anymore. The line went quiet. Vanessa suddenly became aware of how loud the salon had been before the envelope arrived. Now everything felt quieter. People watching without appearing to watch. Brittany scrolling nervously through her phone. Even the receptionist avoiding eye contact. Vanessa opened Instagram quickly. Several clips from the rooftop party had already disappeared. Removed by users, others remained. One repost account had added captions analyzing the visible documents in Dalton's briefcase. The comments looked different now. Wait, this might actually be illegal. She should have never posted company files. This could turn into a lawsuit. Vanessa's pulse quickened. She immediately began deleting content. One video, then another, at 11:58 a.m. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered sharply. "What, Ms. Holloway?" Diaz, a calm female voice asked. "Yes. This is Evelyn Mercer from Clear Lane Systems Legal Counsel." Vanessa froze. The voice continued professionally. "I'm calling to confirm receipt of our preservation notice." Vanessa glanced toward Brittany instinctively. "This is insane," she said. "I didn't do anything." "Then preserving your electronic records should not concern you." The calmness in Evelyn's tone unsettled her, more than anger would have. Vanessa lowered her voice. "Look, whatever Dalton told you." "Mr. Diaz did not issue this notice," Evelyn interrupted politely. "Clear Lane Systems did." That sentence landed harder than Vanessa expected, because for the first time, Dalton sounded connected to something larger than herself, something structured, protected, real. Vanessa swallowed carefully. "You're acting like I leaked national security documents." "No," Evelyn replied. "I'm acting like confidential acquisition materials appeared on public social media platforms." Another silence. Then Evelyn continued. "You are instructed not to destroy, alter, or remove relevant electronic evidence. I already deleted some videos." A pause. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice became even calmer. "Thank you for informing me." Vanessa immediately realized her mistake. At 12:11 p.m., the call ended. The salon suddenly felt unbearable. Brittany approached cautiously. "What did they say?" Vanessa grabbed her purse. "They're bluffing." But her voice sounded thinner now, less certain. Outside, cold rain hit her bare shoulders as she hurried toward her white Range Rover parked near the curb. She climbed inside and slammed the door, then immediately called Dalton again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. She stared through the windshield, breathing harder than before. Memories began replaying differently in her head now. Dalton working late every night. Dalton refusing to discuss projects. Dalton quietly taking calls outside. Dalton reading contracts at the kitchen counter while she mocked him for pretending to be corporate. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier. A dinner party in Upper Arlington. Someone had asked Dalton what he did for work. Before he answered, Vanessa interrupted, laughing. "Nothing exciting," she said. "Warehouse compliance stuff." The entire table moved on. Dalton never corrected her. At the time, she interpreted that silence as weakness. Now she wasn't sure anymore. At 12:43 p.m., Vanessa parked outside Dalton's apartment building on the east side of Columbus. Rainwater dripped from the hood of her SUV while she stared up at the brick building. Nothing about it looked impressive, which confused her more. Because if Dalton really had money, if Clear Lane really mattered, why was he still living like this? Why drive the old truck? Why keep the warehouse job? Why stay invisible? None of it made sense. Vanessa climbed out and entered the lobby quickly in high heels, still meant for brunch photos. A security guard behind the front desk looked up. "Can I help you? I'm here for Dalton Diaz." The guard checked the screen briefly, then nodded respectfully. "One moment, ma'am. I'll notify Mr. Diaz." Mr. Diaz. Not Dalton. Not warehouse guy. Something about the formality bothered her instantly. The guard picked the phone calmly, and for the first time since the rooftop party, Vanessa felt the attention shifting away from her. Ket fam thuk fam sa e Fan 7. The lobby smelled faintly like coffee and floor polish. Muted jazz played through hidden ceiling speakers, while rain streaked down the tall front windows facing the parking lot. Vanessa Holloway Diaz stood near the reception desk in a white designer coat that no longer matched the mood she had arrived with. The security guard lowered the phone after a brief conversation. "He'll be down in a minute, ma'am." Vanessa folded her arms tightly. The guard returned to his monitor without another word. That bothered her too. Nobody here seemed impressed by her. Not her clothes, not her social media presence, not even her irritation. Outside, slushy rainwater splashed against the curb, while residents entered quietly carrying grocery bags and umbrellas. A middle-aged couple walked through the lobby laughing softly about dinner reservations. Normal life continued around her. Meanwhile, her phone kept vibrating with notifications she no longer wanted to read. Legal advice, speculation, people asking if she had actually leaked confidential documents. One comment with nearly 4,000 likes read, "This is why you don't publicly humiliate quiet men." Vanessa locked the screen immediately. At 12:51 p.m., the elevator doors opened. Dalton stepped out, wearing dark jeans, brown boots, and a plain charcoal hoodie beneath his faded work jacket. Nothing flashy. Nothing about him visually matched the legal department that had just terrified her for the last hour. That untarred Vanessa more than if he had arrived wearing a $1,000 suit, because he looked exactly the same. Calm, controlled, unreadable. Dalton stopped several feet away from her, not defensive, not emotional, just cautious. Vanessa spoke first. "What the hell is this?" She held up the legal notice sharply. Dalton glanced at the papers once. The company responded. The company, she snapped. "Don't do that." "Do what? Pretend this isn't coming from you." Dalton's expression barely shifted. It didn't. Vanessa laughed once in disbelief. "Oh, come on. You expect me to believe your little warehouse startup suddenly has some giant legal department?" The words came out harsher than she intended. But Dalton noticed something immediately. She no longer sounded mocking. She sounded uncertain. "That letter came from Clear Lane Counsel," he said calmly. "Not me." Vanessa stepped closer. You had lawyers threaten me over social media posts. You displayed company documents publicly. I didn't know they mattered. Dalton held her gaze evenly. That doesn't change what happened. The lobby went quiet around them. Even the jazz music seemed distant now. Vanessa searched his face for anger. Some sign of satisfaction. Some emotional reaction she could fight against. But Dalton only looked tired. That bothered her more than rage would have. "You're seriously doing this?" she asked. After everything, Dalton remained still for a second before answering. "After everything," he said quietly, "you held a divorce party and streamed confidential files online." Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, closed it again, because hearing it phrased plainly sounded worse than it had online, less funny, more reckless. She shifted directions quickly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "People joke online every day. You weren't joking." "Yes, I was." Dalton looked at her for several seconds without speaking. Vanessa hated that look. Not judgment, recognition. Like he had finally stopped expecting something better from her. "You called me average in front of thousands of people," he said calmly. "You told strangers I was pretending to be important." Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. "Well, maybe if you ever talk to me like a normal husband." This isn't about the marriage anymore. That stopped her. Because Dalton almost never interrupted people, especially her. Now his voice remained low, but firm enough to cut directly through the conversation. "The company has obligations," he continued. "Investors, legal exposure, acquisition review." Vanessa stared at him. "You keep saying company, like you actually matter there." The sentence hung in the air between them. Dalton could feel the exact moment she realized she genuinely did not know who he was anymore. Or maybe never had. He thought back briefly to the last dinner party they attended together before separating. A man in finance had asked Dalton what he did professionally. Before Dalton answered, Vanessa laughed lightly and said, "Oh, compliance stuff. Very boring." The table moved on immediately. Dalton remembered noticing she never once asked what compliance stuff actually meant. She only cared whether it sounded impressive enough for other people. Now she stood in front of him trying to recalculate years of assumptions all at once. "What exactly do you do there?" she asked quietly. Dalton looked toward the rain outside the lobby windows, then back at her. "I build systems that prevent disasters." The answer frustrated her instantly. "That's not an answer. It's enough of one." Vanessa exhaled sharply. "You know what?" she snapped. "This isn't... You've been hiding money from me." "No. Then where did all this come from?" Dalton's eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time. "I worked. That's not funny. I'm not joking." Vanessa stared at him, and suddenly smaller memories began rearranging themselves in her head. Dalton taking conference calls late at night. Dalton reviewing contracts silently at the kitchen counter. Dalton traveling for audits. Dalton turning down expensive vacations while quietly investing elsewhere. She used to interpret all of it as mediocrity. Now she wondered if she had mistaken discipline for weakness. The realization made her angry. "You let me believe you were struggling," she said. Dalton answered immediately. "No, you assumed." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Because it was true. He had never lied about being broke. Vanessa simply stopped paying attention to anything that wasn't visibly luxurious. A resident entered the lobby carrying dry cleaning and nodded politely toward Dalton. "Afternoon, Mr. Diaz?" Dalton nodded back once. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Respect. Subtle, natural, not performative. Another uncomfortable realization settled into place. People who actually knew Dalton treated him differently than people online did. "You embarrassed me," she said suddenly. Dalton almost looked surprised. "You streamed a divorce party mocking your husband. You forced me into this." Dalton's expression flattened slightly. "No," he said quietly. "You wanted an audience." The sentence cut deeper because he said it without emotion. No shouting, no cruelty, just observation. Vanessa looked away first. Her phone buzzed again. She checked it instinctively. Another repost account. Another clip analyzing the rooftop videos. One headline read, "Woman may have accidentally leaked company files during divorce party." Comments below were turning colder now. Lesson: don't mock quiet people online. He looks like the type who saves receipts. She messed with the wrong guy. Vanessa locked the phone quickly, then looked back at Dalton. "You could stop this." "No," he replied. "I can't. That's bullshit. It's already legal." Vanessa stepped closer again, lowering her voice. "So, what? You're just gonna hide behind attorneys now?" Dalton looked at her steadily. "For the rest of this process, yes." The answer sounded final. Professional. Not emotional. And Vanessa suddenly realized something terrifying. Dalton was no longer reacting like a husband. He was reacting like someone separating risk, separating exposure, separating liability. She had spent years believing he lacked confidence because he avoided conflict. Now she saw something else entirely. Dalton avoided unnecessary conflict because he never moved emotionally when systems were involved. And systems were exactly what she had triggered. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Dalton answered honestly. "That depends on what else was shared." A silence followed, heavy this time, because both of them understood the implication. Vanessa thought back to the rooftop, the open briefcase, Kayla filming, Brittany joking, random strangers recording from other angles. For the first time since the party, genuine fear flickered across her face. Dalton noticed it immediately, but he felt no satisfaction from it. Only distance, tired distance. Vanessa swallowed carefully. "I didn't think—" "I know," Dalton interrupted softly. That hurt worse than anger. The elevator behind him opened again. A delivery driver stepped out carrying packages. Normal life continued around them, while their marriage collapsed quietly beneath fluorescent lobby lights. Dalton stepped back slightly. "From now on," he said, "communicate through attorneys." Vanessa stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." Then she said the one thing that still carried sharpness. "Maybe people should know who you really are." Dalton looked at her calmly. That's exactly what you should have thought about before posting. The elevator doors opened again behind him. Dalton stepped inside without another word. Vanessa stood frozen in the lobby, watching the doors close. And for the first time since the divorce party began, she realized she no longer controlled the story. Vanessa Holloway Diaz did not go home after leaving Dalton's apartment building. She drove aimlessly through wet Columbus streets for nearly 40 minutes, while rain blurred the windshield and anxiety settled deeper into her chest with every passing mile. By 3:20 p.m., she parked outside a boutique coffee shop in German Village and sat motionless inside the SUV. Her phone rested in her hand. Silent now. Not because notifications had stopped, because she had muted everything. Too many comments, too many reposts, too many strangers suddenly acting like legal experts. For the first time since the rooftop party, Vanessa realized public attention changed direction faster than loyalty ever did. At noon, she had still been the woman escaping a boring husband. By mid-afternoon, people were calling her reckless, irresponsible, stupid. And the worst part was how quickly her friends had grown quieter. Brittany stopped posting entirely. Kayla Monroe had already removed 2 collaborative videos. Even the comments from supporters sounded less confident now. "Girl, you might need a lawyer? This doesn't look good. Why would you show documents online?" Vanessa leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes briefly. Then her phone buzzed again. Brittany. Vanessa answered immediately. "Well?" Brittany asked nervously. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes." And Vanessa stared through the rain-covered windshield. "He's acting weird." "What does that mean?" "He's calm." Brittany hesitated. "That's worse." Vanessa hated hearing that because it matched exactly what she had started feeling herself. Dalton wasn't reacting emotionally. He wasn't begging, wasn't yelling, wasn't threatening her personally. He had stepped completely outside the emotional framework she expected from him. That made him impossible to control. "What are we doing?" Brittany asked quietly. Vanessa straightened slightly. "We're not doing anything. They're overreacting." "Vanessa." "No," she snapped. "I'm not letting Dalton suddenly pretend he's some corporate victim." The anger helped temporarily. Anger felt more stable than uncertainty. And Vanessa had spent years surviving uncomfortable feelings by turning them outward. At 4:02 p.m., she reopened Instagram. Her finger hovered over the camera icon for several seconds. Then she pressed record. The lighting inside the SUV softened her features naturally. Rain on the windows created a dramatic background. Vanessa knew instinctively how to frame emotion online. That part came easily to her. She inhaled shakily before speaking. "I didn't want to do this publicly," she began softly. A pause. "But I feel like I need to defend myself." Her voice cracked slightly at the perfect moment. Not fully fake, not fully real either. Something in between. "I've spent years protecting someone who constantly hid things from me," she continued. "And now suddenly, I'm being threatened by lawyers because I made jokes online." Her eyes glistened carefully. Comments began flooding upward instantly. Stay strong. This feels controlling. Lawyers over memes is crazy. Vanessa kept going. I never shared anything dangerous. I didn't even know what those papers were. Dalton kept secrets from me our entire marriage. That sentence felt safer to her, because technically it was true. Dalton had kept enormous parts of his life private. What Vanessa still refused to confront was why. She tilted the phone slightly closer. And honestly, I think this is about power. He finally found a way to scare me. The livestream audience climbed quickly. 3,000 viewers. Then 4. Then higher. Vanessa watched the number rising and felt temporary relief returning. Attention still worked. Narrative still mattered. People still believed her. But deeper in the comments section, cracks had already started forming. One viewer wrote, "Why would a company send legal notices over nothing?" Another, "Something about this story doesn't add up." And another, if he was really broke, how does he have corporate attorneys? Vanessa ignored those. Instead, she continued speaking emotionally about years of emotional neglect and being married to someone who lived like he had no future. Meanwhile, across Columbus, Dalton Diaz stood inside Warehouse Section C at Mid-State Freight, reviewing forklift maintenance records. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while diesel fumes drifted faintly through the loading area. His workday continued exactly the same. Forklifts moving, drivers arguing over schedules, pallets slamming against concrete floors. Nobody there fully understood what was happening online. A few workers had seen clips. Some whispered when Dalton walked past. But Dalton never acknowledged any of it. At 4:26 p.m., Hector Ruiz approached him near Dock 9. "You good?" Hector asked carefully. Dalton finished signing a maintenance sheet before answering. "Yeah." Hector nodded slowly, then added quietly, "Internet's weird, man." Dalton almost smiled. "That's one word for it." Hector looked like he wanted to ask more questions. Instead, he simply walked away. Dalton appreciated that. At 4:41 p.m., his phone vibrated. Evelyn Mercer. Dalton stepped into a quieter hallway beside the employee lockers before answering. She posted again. Evelyn said immediately, "I saw. Emotional manipulation angle this time." Dalton leaned against the wall. "She's trying to regain control." "Yes," Evelyn replied calmly, "but she's making another mistake." Dalton already knew which one. More statements. More timestamps. More discoverable content. Online emotion. Created permanent records. "That video already crossed 50,000 views," Evelyn added. Dalton closed his eyes briefly. Any direct claims she implied intimidation and hidden finances. Dalton nodded once, slowly. That changed things legally. Not dramatically yet, but enough. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "For now, nothing." A short pause followed. Then Evelyn spoke again. "Noah wants to accelerate disclosure timelines." Dalton frowned slightly. "The acquisition?" "Yes." That surprised him. "Noah thinks silence now creates more instability later," Evelyn explained. "Especially if your identity becomes public anyway? Dalton looked through the warehouse corridor window toward rows of freight trucks outside. For years, anonymity had protected him. Now, anonymity itself was becoming unstable. At 5:03 p.m., Vanessa's live stream suddenly shifted tone, because the audience started pushing back harder. A viewer commented, "Show the letter." Another, "Did you delete videos after the notice?" Then another, "You said he was broke. Why does he have equity lawyers?" Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. She answered too quickly. "Because he's pretending to be important." Wrong response. The comment section reacted instantly. Pretending doesn't create legal departments. You keep avoiding details. This story sounds off. Vanessa felt control slipping again. That terrified her more than the legal letter itself, because public perception had always been her strongest weapon. Without that, she had very little leverage left. At 5:11 p.m., she ended the live stream abruptly, then immediately called Kayla Monroe. Kayla answered carefully. "Hey, you need to post support," Vanessa said. A pause. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." Vanessa's expression hardened. "So, you're backing away too. I'm being careful." "You posted the party videos." "Because I thought it was drama," Kayla replied quietly. "Not corporate litigation." The sentence landed heavily. Corporate litigation, not relationship drama, not influencer gossip, real consequences. Vanessa ended the call without replying. Across town, Dalton sat alone in his truck after work, while rain tapped steadily across the windshield again. He opened social media one final time, not to read comments, only to archive Vanessa's second live stream. He downloaded the full recording, time-stamped it, stored it beside the others, then locked his phone. Outside the truck window, evening traffic crawled through Columbus beneath gray skies. Dalton rested both hands quietly on the steering wheel. He felt tired, not victorious, not angry, just tired. Because every new video Vanessa posted revealed the same thing more clearly. She still believed this situation was emotional. Meanwhile, the people surrounding Dalton had already moved it into systems. Legal systems, financial systems, corporate systems. Places where evidence mattered more than performance. His phone buzzed one more time, a text from Evelyn Mercer. "We may have another issue. Call me when you're parked." Dalton stared at the message for a few seconds. Then the next notification appeared beneath it. Kayla Monroe had accidentally uploaded a screenshot from a private group chat. And based on the preview alone, Dalton already knew it was bad. The screenshot spread across social media in less than 20 minutes. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded honest. That was always more dangerous. At 7:14 p.m., Dalton sat inside his parked truck outside the apartment building, while downtown Columbus traffic crawled through freezing rain nearby. His phone screen glowed against the dark interior as he opened the leaked image Kayla Monroe had accidentally uploaded to her Instagram story. A private group chat, 6 women inside, Vanessa, Brittany, Kayla, and 3 others Dalton barely recognized. The screenshot lasted only 11 minutes before deletion. Long enough. The internet had already saved it. Dalton read the messages silently. Brittany, make sure you get good video of the cake. Kayla, this could seriously trend if you play it right. Vanessa, I'm telling you, nobody even knows what Dalton does, LOL. Another message followed beneath it. Vanessa again, maybe I should leak his fake business papers for entertainment value. Then Brittany replied, do it. Men hate embarrassment more than divorce. Dalton stared at the screen for several long seconds. Not angry, not shocked, just finished. Because private conversations removed performance. People sounded different when they thought nobody else would ever read the words. His phone buzzed. Evelyn Mercer. I assume you've seen it, she said immediately. Yes. Good. Save everything. Already done. Dalton had archived the screenshot before Evelyn even called. That message changes legal intent analysis, Evelyn continued, especially the phrase about leaking documents. Dalton looked out through the rain-covered windshield. Cars moved slowly beneath glowing traffic lights across Livingston Avenue. Normal people heading home from work. Meanwhile, his marriage was turning into evidence folders. What happens now? He asked quietly. We expand discovery preparation. Dalton nodded once. That made sense. The screenshot transformed Vanessa's actions from careless behavior into something potentially deliberate. Intent mattered, especially once attorneys became involved. At 7:48 p.m., Dalton carried printed copies of the screenshot into Graham Pike's office downtown. The older attorney remained at work despite the late hour. A desk lamp illuminated stacks of paperwork, while jazz music played softly from a small radio near the bookshelf. Graham adjusted his glasses while reviewing the screenshot. Then he leaned back slowly. Well, he said calmly, that's unfortunate. Dalton sat across from him silently. Graham tapped one line with his pen. Nobody even knows what Dalton does. The attorney looked up. She underestimated you so completely that she stopped believing consequences applied. Dalton said nothing, because the sentence felt too accurate. Graham continued reading. Leak his fake business papers for entertainment value. A pause. That line matters. Dalton folded his arms quietly. She thought it was a joke. Maybe Graham replied. But courts care less about jokes. Once damages enter the conversation, the office went quiet again. Rain tapped steadily against the windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Finally, Graham closed the folder. Any more financial surprises? Dalton hesitated slightly. There's something else. He handed over another document folder. Credit records, mailing statements, application history. Graham frowned while reading. Then his expression hardened subtly. She opened this without telling you, yes. The attorney flipped another page carefully. A business credit card application, submitted 8 months earlier, using a secondary business mailing address connected to Dalton's Compliance Consulting, LLC. Not illegal by itself, but dangerous, especially during financial discovery. She listed projected income that doesn't match reported earnings, Graham observed. Dalton nodded slowly. I never saw the statements. Graham continued reading silently. Luxury purchases, event deposits, hotel reservations, retail charges. Nearly $38,000. Most accumulated while Vanessa publicly joked online about Dalton being financially unsuccessful. The irony would have been funny under different circumstances. Now it just looked sad. At 8:16 p.m., Graham placed both folders side by side. The online narrative is collapsing, he said. Dalton remained quiet. Your wife built public sympathy around the idea that she carried a financially weak husband. Graham continued. But the records show you funded almost everything. Dalton stared toward the office window. Snow had started mixing lightly with rain now. Columbus traffic blurred beneath white streaks. She needed people to believe it, he said quietly. Graham studied him for a second. You still protecting her? Dalton answered honestly. I don't know. The attorney nodded once. Fair answer, because despite everything, Dalton still struggled with something simple and painful. He remembered loving Vanessa before she turned life into performance. That memory complicated things, not legally, emotionally. At 8:42 p.m., another problem surfaced. Evelyn Mercer called again. This just escalated, she said immediately. Dalton straightened slightly. How? One of the repost accounts connected the Buckeye Freight Capital acquisition timeline to the visible documents. Dalton's jaw tightened. How accurate? Too accurate. That was bad. Very bad. Because speculation became dangerous when it approached truth closely enough to influence markets, negotiations, or investor confidence. Buckeye's legal team is now involved, Evelyn added. Dalton closed his eyes briefly. The situation had officially expanded beyond Clear Lane. Corporate lawyers multiplied fast once acquisition risk appeared. What do they want? He asked. For now, containment. And later, a pause. Depends on whether this spreads further. Dalton looked down at the screenshot again. One stupid rooftop livestream. One open briefcase. Now multiple legal departments were involved. He thought back to Vanessa, laughing beside the rooftop fire pit, while strangers online cheered. None of those people would still be around when invoices arrived. That was the part social media never showed. Attention disappeared fast. Consequences stayed. At 9:03 p.m., Vanessa sat alone inside her condominium rental in Upper Arlington, scrolling through the same leaked group chat screenshot over and over again. Brittany had called crying twice already. Kayla stopped answering entirely. The internet was turning vicious now. Not playful, not supportive, cruel. The same strangers who praised Vanessa 48 hours earlier now dissected every old clip looking for contradictions. One repost compared her statements about Dalton being financially useless against public property records, showing mortgage payments tied mostly to his accounts. Another account found old anniversary photos inside restaurants Vanessa previously mocked online as cheap. Comments flooded beneath them. She used him. He was quiet, not broke. This is why people should stop mocking their spouses online. Vanessa threw the phone onto the couch violently. then picked it up again 30 seconds later, because she could not stop watching public opinion move away from her. At 9:27 p.m., her attorney finally called. Martin Keller. Divorce attorney. Expensive. Aggressive. Usually confident. Tonight, he sounded irritated. "You need to stop posting immediately," he said. Vanessa paced across the living room. "I was defending myself. You were creating discoverable evidence. I didn't leak anything important." Vanessa Martin interrupted sharply. "That is no longer the point." She stopped pacing. "The appearance of intentional conduct matters." That sentence unsettled her deeply because it sounded exactly like something Evelyn Mercer would say. Cold, structured, legal. Vanessa lowered herself slowly onto the couch. What happens if this gets worse? Martin paused carefully. That depends how much documentation they already have. Meanwhile, downtown Graham Pike reviewed subpoena preparation paperwork beside Dalton, social media records, deleted Kitian requests, electronic preservation demands, potential financial tracing. The process had become mechanical now, systematic. Dalton watched silently, while Graham organized files into labeled folders. For years, people underestimated Dalton because he moved quietly. Now that same quietness became an advantage. Because while Vanessa performed publicly, Dalton documented privately. Every receipt, every payment, every timeline. At 10:11 p.m., Graham slid one final document across the desk. "What's this?" Dalton looked down. "A subpoena request draft for platform data preservation, Instagram, TikTok. Message history, metadata." Graham capped his pen slowly. "Once this starts," he said calmly, "the story leaves social media and enters court records." Dalton stared at the paperwork. Then finally, asked the question, sitting quietly beneath everything else. "Do you think she understands that?" Yet Graham looked toward the rain-dark city outside the office windows. "No," he said, "but she's about to." Franklin County Domestic Relations Court looked colder than Dalton remembered. Gray, marble floors reflected fluorescent ceiling lights across long, quiet hallways, where attorneys walked quickly, carrying leather folders and coffee cups. Outside the courthouse windows, freezing rain drifted across downtown Columbus, while reporters clustered near the front entrance, hoping for stories bigger than divorce hearings. Most mornings, nobody paid attention to family court. But social media had changed that. Now public humiliation traveled fast enough to drag private collapse into public spaces. At 8:14 a.m., Dalton stepped through courthouse security, wearing a navy suit he had owned for nearly 7 years. No designer label, no expensive watch. The same silver Casio still rested beneath his cuff. He carried a single black document case in one hand while Graham Pike walked beside him, reviewing notes quietly. "Today isn't about winning," Graham said as they approached courtroom 4C. "Today is about establishing credibility." Dalton nodded once. He already understood. Courts noticed patterns before emotion. Who exaggerated? Who documented? Who performed? Who stayed consistent? At the opposite end of the hallway, Vanessa Holloway Diaz arrived with Martin Keller and 2 assistants. She looked polished. Cream-colored coat. Perfect hair. Professional makeup carefully designed to appear effortless. But Dalton noticed something immediately. Her eyes moved too fast. Toward phones. Toward people whispering. Toward strangers recognizing her from online clips. Vanessa noticed him standing near the courtroom doors. For half a second, neither moved. Then Martin leaned toward her and said something quietly. Vanessa looked away first. That detail mattered to Dalton more than it should have. Not because it felt victorious, because it confirmed something he had already started realizing. Vanessa was no longer certain how this story ended. At 8:37 a.m., the courtroom doors opened. Judge Elaine Porter entered 3 minutes later. Mid-50s, sharp posture, minimal expression. The kind of judge who looked like she had very little patience for unnecessary drama. Dalton appreciated that immediately. Courtroom 4C settled into silence. Martin Keller spoke first. He framed the situation carefully. A deteriorating marriage, emotional conflict, social media misunderstandings amplified publicly. Vanessa sat beside him with controlled composure while cameras from local outlets remained outside the courtroom doors. No live streams here, no filters, no audience applause, only records. Then Graham Pike stood. He spoke more slowly, more directly, no dramatic tone, no emotional storytelling. Just timelines, evidence, financial records, document exposure, preservation notices. The atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted almost immediately, especially once Graham introduced printed screenshots from the rooftop party. Vanessa's smile beside the open briefcase, visible acquisition materials, group chat messages discussing leaking papers for entertainment value. Judge Porter reviewed each page carefully without speaking. Dalton watched her eyes move slightly slower once she reached the leaked messages. That mattered. Martin Keller stepped in quickly. Your Honor, my client did not understand the nature of the documents displayed. Judge Porter looked up calmly. Then why discuss leaking them? Martin hesitated for half a second. Small pause, still noticeable. They believed the materials were irrelevant. Judge Porter looked back down at the screenshots. The court is less concerned with what they believed than what they publicly distributed. Silence settled heavily across the room. Vanessa shifted slightly in her seat. Dalton noticed her fingers tightening around a pen. He remembered those same hands arranging champagne glasses beneath rooftop lights 3 nights earlier. The contrast felt surreal now. At 9:06 a.m., Graham introduced financial records, mortgage payments, utility histories, joint account summaries, credit disclosures. Martin objected twice. Judge Porter overruled both objections quickly. The judge's expression never fully changed, but Dalton recognized something subtle happening. The original online narrative was collapsing under documentation because the records showed something different than Vanessa's public version of events. Dalton had funded most household stability for years, quietly, consistently, even while Vanessa mocked him publicly for lacking ambition. Judge Porter reviewed another folder. These credit accounts were undisclosed, she asked. Graham nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Opened using a business mailing address connected to Mr. Diaz. Martin shifted visibly beside Vanessa. That detail bothered him. Good attorneys understood dangerous patterns early, and hidden financial activity during divorce proceedings created exactly the kind of pattern judges disliked. At 9:24 a.m., the conversation shifted toward electronic evidence. Evelyn Mercer sat quietly in the second courtroom row beside another Clear Lane attorney. Corporate counsel had not formally entered the divorce proceedings, but their presence changed the atmosphere anyway. Judge Porter noticed them immediately. So Clear Lane Systems is actively pursuing preservation requests, she asked. Evelyn stood briefly. Yes, Your Honor. No extra explanation. No theatrics. Just certainty. Judge Porter nodded once, then looked toward Vanessa. Ms. Holloway Diaz, she said calmly, have you deleted any relevant online content after receiving preservation notice? Vanessa glanced toward Martin instinctively. Too quickly, Judge Porter noticed. Everyone did. Martin answered carefully. Some posts were removed before full understanding of the preservation implications. Judge Porter folded her hands slowly. That is not what I asked. Silence. Vanessa finally spoke herself. Yes. The words sounded small inside the courtroom. Judge Porter wrote something down. Dalton watched, without emotion. Not because the moment lacked importance, because by now he understood the system moving around them. Every answer created position. Every hesitation created impression. Every inconsistency became permanent. At 9:41 a.m., Martin attempted to redirect. He framed Vanessa as emotionally overwhelmed during the collapse of a long marriage. He implied Dalton's secrecy contributed to instability. That part almost worked. Almost. Then Judge Porter asked a simple question. Did Mr. Diaz ever publicly humiliate Ms. Holloway Diaz online? Martin paused. Oh, did he live stream private marital disputes? No. Did he distribute her financial records publicly? No. Judge Porter nodded once, then returned to the evidence folder silently. The courtroom air changed again. Dalton sat motionless beside Graham Pike. He did not feel triumphant. That surprised him slightly. Years earlier, he might have imagined satisfaction in moments like this. Being proven right. Being vindicated publicly. Instead, he mostly felt tired and strangely sad, because the woman sitting across the courtroom had once known him before all of this. Before followers, before branding, before public performance replaced private intimacy. At 10:03 a.m. another issue emerged. One of Buckeye Freight Capital's legal representatives entered quietly through the rear courtroom doors. Martin noticed immediately. So did Vanessa. The color shifted slightly from her face, because now it no longer looked like a messy divorce with social media complications. Now corporations were appearing physically inside the courtroom. Real companies, real attorneys, real consequences. Judge Porter reviewed one final document before speaking. The court orders immediate preservation of all electronic devices accounts, cloud storage, and communication records relevant to this matter. Vanessa stared downward silently. No deletions, the judge continued. No account modifications. No destruction of electronically stored information. Another note added carefully. And given the overlap with potential corporate exposure, the court strongly advises strict compliance. Strict compliance? Cold words, heavy words, words Dalton recognized from years inside regulatory systems. At 10:17 a.m., the hearing recessed temporarily. People began standing slowly. Papers shuffled. Attorneys whispered. Vanessa remained seated for several seconds longer than everyone else. Dalton gathered his documents calmly, while Graham leaned closer. "She's losing narrative control," the attorney said quietly. Dalton looked across the courtroom. Vanessa finally stood beside Martin Keller, but her posture had changed. Smaller somehow. Less certain. Then something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened again. Noah Bennett entered wearing a dark charcoal suit and carrying a thin leather portfolio. Several people recognized him immediately from industry publications. Vanessa looked directly at him, then back at Dalton. And for the first time since the divorce party began, Dalton watched genuine realization settle fully across her face. Not suspicion anymore, not confusion, understanding. Dalton Diaz had never been pretending. 3 days after the hearing, Clear Lane Systems held its national expansion announcement inside a renovated industrial event space overlooking the Ohio River in Cincinnati. The building had once been a shipping terminal decades earlier. Now exposed steel beams, glass walls, and massive digital screens transformed it into the kind of modern corporate venue investors liked photographing. Rows of black chairs filled the main floor beneath suspended lighting rigs. Logistics executives, transportation reporters, regional investors, and freight industry analysts moved through the crowd holding branded folders and catered coffee cups. Outside, television vans lined the street. Inside, everything ran on schedule. That mattered to Dalton. Systems always mattered more than appearances. At 8:42 a.m., Dalton stood alone near a side hallway adjusting the cuff of his navy suit while staff members finalized stage lighting. He looked exactly the same as always. Same posture, same quiet expression. Same silver Casio watch beneath his sleeve. Only now, the environment around him finally matched the scale of the life he had kept hidden. Noah Bennett approached, carrying 2 coffees. "You ready?" he asked. Dalton accepted 1 cup. "No." Noah laughed softly. "Good answer." Behind them, large digital screens displayed the new Clear Lane Systems branding package. National Freight Compliance Integration Partnership. Clear Lane Systems plus Buckeye Freight Capital. Dalton stared at the screen silently. 5 years of work. 5 years of late-night audits, compliance modeling, regulatory negotiations, and invisible labor, finally becoming public. And somehow, the timing still felt wrong. Not because of the company, because of Vanessa. He never wanted the truth about his career revealed this way. Noah leaned beside him quietly. "You know, this changes everything today." Dalton nodded once. Yes. Press already connected your name to the court filings. That part did not surprise him. Reporters moved quickly once legal documents became public record, especially when social media drama collided with corporate expansion. One Columbus business blog had already published a headline earlier that morning. Quiet Ohio warehouse husband, revealed as Clear Lane co-founder Dalton, hated the headline instantly. Not because it embarrassed him, because it simplified years of work into internet irony. But he understood how the internet operated. Narratives mattered more than nuance. At 9:03 a.m., Vanessa Holloway Diaz sat alone inside her Upper Arlington rental, staring at the same headline on her phone. The television across the room played muted financial news coverage discussing regional logistics growth in the Midwest. Then the screen changed. Clear Lane Systems logo. Live footage from Cincinnati. Vanessa slowly raised the volume. A reporter spoke calmly. Today's expansion announcement follows major investment activity connected to Buckeye Freight Capital and rapidly growing logistics tech firm Clear Lane Systems. Then photos appeared on screen. Noah Bennett, Evelyn Mercer, and finally, Dalton. Professional headshot, simple dark suit, calm expression. Text beneath the image read, Dalton Diaz, co-founder and chief compliance officer. Vanessa stopped breathing for half a second, not because she learned Dalton was successful, because she suddenly realized how many opportunities she had been given to notice and ignored. The memories came quickly now. Dalton leaving for boring compliance meetings. Dalton reading transportation regulations late at night. Dalton quietly taking conference calls outside during holidays. Dalton once telling her, most important work happens before anyone notices it. At the time, she laughed at him. Now she understood. He had been telling the truth the entire time. Her phone buzzed violently with incoming texts. Brittany. Oh my God, turn on CNBC Kayla. Vanessa. This is bad. Another message from an unknown number. You really threw a divorce party for a multimillionaire. Vanessa locked the screen immediately. Her stomach tightened painfully. Not because Dalton had money, because she had publicly humiliated someone she fundamentally misunderstood. At 9:27 a.m., the Cincinnati event officially began. Noah Bennett stepped onto the stage, first beneath bright white lights and applause from the audience. He spoke confidently about freight modernization, transportation, infrastructure, and national expansion goals. Dalton waited backstage, listening quietly. The applause sounded distant, muted. His thoughts stayed elsewhere. Not on the investors, not on the cameras. On the simple fact that Vanessa could have known all of this if she had ever stopped mocking the parts of him that looked ordinary. Then Noah reached the final section of his speech. And before we move into the partnership presentation, Noah said, "There's one person I need to acknowledge publicly." Dalton looked down briefly. Noah continued, 5 years ago, Clear Lane Systems existed mostly as spreadsheets and ideas. One of the people responsible for turning it into a functioning national compliance framework never wanted public attention. Several audience members smiled lightly. Noah looked toward backstage. But invisible work still matters. Then he said the words publicly, for the first time. Our co-founder and chief compliance officer, Dalton Diaz. Applause filled the room. Dalton stepped onto the stage. Bright lights immediately hit his eyes. Cameras flashed. Reporters lifted phones. And for the first time in years, Dalton stood in front of an audience without hiding himself behind smaller titles. The applause continued longer than he expected. Not overwhelming, respectful, professional. Noah shook his hand once, then stepped aside. Dalton approached the podium quietly. Across Ohio, Vanessa watched from her couch in complete silence. Dalton adjusted the microphone slightly, then spoke the same way he always did. Directly, calmly. Most people only notice systems after they fail, he said. Our job has always been preventing failure before it reaches the public. No dramatic performance, no arrogance, no attempt to sound inspirational, just competence. That hurt Vanessa more than if he had bragged. Because the man speaking on stage looked exactly like the man she mocked online for being average. The difference was that everyone else in the room clearly respected him. At 10:14 a.m., clips from the event flooded social media. And suddenly, Vanessa's old videos returned with entirely different context. The internet moved brutally fast. Now people reposted the divorce party clips beside Dalton's executive announcement photos. Side-by-side comparisons spread everywhere. Vanessa laughing warehouse energy, cut immediately against Dalton Diaz co-founder. Comment sections exploded. She fumbled horribly. This man was building a company while she was throwing parties. Never mock quiet people. Even old supporters disappeared. Several of Vanessa's small brand sponsors quietly removed her promotional codes by noon. An event company canceled an upcoming collaboration. A skincare partnership stopped responding entirely. Online attention had shifted again. Only this time, it shifted away permanently. At 11:02 a.m., Dalton finally stepped off stage after interviews and investor introductions. He moved toward a quieter hallway beside the conference rooms while Noah handled media questions. His phone buzzed. Graham Pike. Dalton answered immediately. You've officially become the reasonable one. Online? Graham said dryly. Dalton almost smiled. That bad depends who you ask. Graham's tone shifted, slightly more serious. There's another issue now. Dalton leaned against the hallway wall. What kind of issue? Civil liability? Dalton already suspected. Buckeye Freight Capital had remained unusually quiet all morning. Too quiet. What are they considering, he asked. A claim connected to disclosure exposure and reputational risk. Dalton closed his eyes briefly. The situation was moving exactly where he feared it would. Because corporations rarely stayed emotional. Eventually, they calculated costs. And once costs appeared, someone received the bill. At 11:19 a.m., Dalton looked through the glass hallway windows toward the Ohio River below. Reporters still moved around the building outside. Investors laughed near catering tables. The company continued growing. Life continued moving. Meanwhile, somewhere in Columbus, Vanessa was probably still staring at the television, trying to understand how badly she had misread him. His phone buzzed again, this time from Evelyn Mercer. The message contained only one sentence. "Civil notice is being finalized now." Dalton stared at the screen silently, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Because deep down he already knew something difficult, but true. The internet had finished humiliating Vanessa. Now the legal system was beginning. The settlement meeting took place on a gray Thursday morning inside a law office overlooking downtown Columbus. Rain slid slowly down the tall conference room windows, while muted traffic crawled below across Broad Street. Inside, the atmosphere felt controlled, in the uncomfortable way only legal offices could create. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. Just polished wood tables, organized folders, and people speaking carefully, because every sentence carried consequences. Dalton arrived first with Graham Pike. He wore the same navy suit from court, same watch, same calm expression. A legal assistant offered coffee. Dalton declined politely. Across the table sat neatly organized binders labeled Diaz, Financial Disclosures, Social Media Evidence, Settlement Terms, Clear Lane Systems, Civil Exposure. The last binder remained closed. That was intentional. At 9:07 a.m., Vanessa entered beside Martin Keller. She looked different now, still polished, still carefully dressed. But the confidence she carried during the rooftop party was gone. The internet had already punished her publicly. Sponsors disappeared. Follower growth collapsed. Comment sections turned hostile. Even people defending her online sounded exhausted. Dalton noticed something else too. Vanessa no longer made eye contact immediately when entering rooms. That had changed recently. Martin Keller greeted Graham professionally before everyone sat down. No one mentioned the online drama directly at first. Settlement meetings rarely started emotionally. They started mathematically. Assets, debt, exposure, risk. Martin spoke first. My client would prefer a private resolution. Graham nodded once. So would Mr. Diaz. Vanessa looked toward Dalton carefully. He remained focused on the documents in front of him. No anger, no satisfaction, just patience. Martin continued. Given the public nature of recent events, Vanessa is requesting confidentiality provisions regarding future statements and media commentary. Graham slid a folder across the table calmly. Reasonable, he said. Provided all defamatory content is permanently removed first. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. There it was again. That word. Defamatory. Cold. Legal language, replacing emotional arguments. Martin opened the folder silently. Inside were organized screenshots from the divorce party videos, live stream captions, reposts, and public statements, implying Dalton hid money or fabricated professional importance. Everything time-stamped, everything archived. The structure of it unsettled Vanessa immediately. Because Dalton had not reacted emotionally online once. He had simply documented. Graham spoke calmly. My client has no interest in humiliating Ms. Holloway Diaz publicly, but he also has no obligation to absorb reputational damage quietly. Vanessa finally looked directly at Dalton. You're acting like I destroyed your life. Dalton answered without changing tone. No, he said, and you tried to turn it into entertainment. Silence settled briefly across the room. Martin stepped in quickly. Let's stay focused on resolution. That word mattered. Resolution, not revenge, not punishment. Resolution. At 9:41 a.m., Graham reviewed the proposed financial terms. The marital house had already been sold pending final division. Retirement accounts existed, but were relatively modest compared to Dalton's clear lane equity. That was where things became complicated. Martin leaned back slightly. My client believes she is entitled to a portion of future clear lane growth. Graham did not respond immediately. Instead, he opened another binder. Operating agreements, equity timelines, formation records, investment structures, documents proving Dalton's ownership position, predated several later valuation increases connected to protected business agreements. Vanessa watched the pages turn slowly. For the first time, she saw physical proof of how long Dalton had been building something quietly behind the life she mocked. 5 years, late nights, conference calls, compliance systems, federal contracts. He had not been pretending. He had been patient. Graham finally spoke. Clear lane equity protections are heavily structured, he said calmly, especially after recent acquisition activity. Martin frowned slightly while reviewing the documents. You're saying her access is limited. I'm saying the company anticipated risk years ago. Dalton remained silent. Because that part was true. Startups surviving long enough to become valuable usually prepared for instability early. Divorce clauses, liability shields, operating restrictions. Noah Bennett insisted on them from the beginning. At the time, Dalton considered the precautions excessive. Now he understood them completely. At 10:06 a.m., Graham opened the second major folder. Debt disclosures, credit reports, payment histories. Vanessa's expression shifted immediately. Martin reviewed the documents carefully, then slower, then more carefully again. $38,000 in undisclosed spending, event financing, luxury retail balances, travel expenses, brand-related purchases, disguised as business costs, and the credit applications tied partially to Dalton's mailing structures. This weakens her position considerably, Graham said calmly. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. I built my brand with those expenses. With whose money? Graham asked. The room went quiet. Dalton looked toward the rain outside the conference room windows. He felt strangely detached from the conversation now. Not because it lacked importance, because emotionally the marriage already felt over. What remained were systems, untangling themselves. Martin adjusted his glasses slowly. Vanessa contributed non-financial value to the marriage. Absolutely, Graham replied evenly. And Mr. Diaz is not contesting equitable division. But equitable does not mean disconnected from documented financial reality. Again, the language stayed cold, measured. No insults, no raised voices. That made everything feel heavier, somehow. At 10:34 a.m., the closed clear lane binder finally opened. Evelyn Mercer entered the conference room at exactly the right moment, carrying another slim folder beneath one arm. She greeted everyone politely before sitting beside Graham. Vanessa visibly stiffened. Evelyn's presence changed the atmosphere immediately. Not louder, more dangerous. Because Evelyn never entered rooms casually. She opened the folder calmly. Clear Lane Systems is prepared to resolve civil exposure without extended litigation, she said. Martin leaned forward carefully. What terms? Evelyn slid a document across the table. Permanent removal of all remaining defamatory or misleading content. Written correction regarding corporate disclosures. Confirmation of evidence. Preservation compliance. No future use of company materials, branding, or references for monetized online content. Vanessa stared at the pages. Then at Dalton. You're seriously making me sign a correction? Dalton answered quietly. No, the company is. That distinction mattered. And Vanessa hated it. Because Dalton no longer looked emotionally invested in humiliating her. He looked separated from the conflict entirely. Like someone watching systems process consequences automatically. At 10:57 a.m. Martin requested a short, private discussion with Vanessa in another room. The moment the door closed behind them, Graham exhaled slowly. She's cornered, he said. Dalton looked down at the settlement paperwork. I didn't want this. Graham studied him for a second. I know. Evelyn remained focused on her notes. She still doesn't fully understand how lucky she is. Dalton frowned slightly. What do you mean? If Buckeye Freight Capital pushed aggressively, Evelyn replied calmly, this becomes catastrophic for her financially. Dalton leaned back silently. That possibility had stayed in the background for days now. Unspoken, but present. Because once corporations calculated actual exposure costs, numbers escalated fast. And unlike internet drama, legal debt stayed real for years. At 11:21 a.m., Vanessa returned to the conference room. Her expression looked tighter now, more exhausted. Martin sat beside her carefully. My client rejects the current settlement structure, he announced. Graham blinked once, slowly. Evelyn remained motionless. Vanessa looked directly at Dalton. You built this entire secret life while making me feel crazy for wanting more. Dalton answered honestly. I built a company, not a secret life. That's easy for you to say now. No, Dalton replied quietly. It was easy to say when nobody was watching. The room fell silent again. Vanessa looked away first. Martin gathered papers slowly. We'll proceed toward trial preparation. Graham nodded once. So noted. No shouting followed. No dramatic exits. Only signatures confirming failed negotiation. That somehow felt sadder. At 11:43 a.m., Dalton stood near the conference room windows, watching rain drift across downtown Columbus while the meeting dissolved behind him. His phone buzzed once. A news notification. Another article about the divorce party fallout. Another public discussion involving strangers who understood almost nothing. Dalton locked the screen immediately. Then Evelyn stepped beside him quietly. She should have taken the settlement, she said. Dalton looked down toward the wet streets below. She still thinks this is emotional, he replied. Evelyn closed her folder calmly. And that she said is exactly why she's losing. The call came on a Monday morning at 7:18 a.m. Dalton was standing inside his apartment kitchen, pouring coffee into a black thermos when Graham Pike's name appeared on his phone. Outside early spring, rain drifted lightly across Columbus. The city looked gray and half awake beneath low clouds while traffic slowly built along Interstate 70. Dalton inquired immediately. Morning. Graham sounded unusually alert. We have a witness. Dalton leaned against the kitchen counter quietly. Who Rachel Sloan? That name surprised him. Rachel had been one of Vanessa's closest friends for years. Not loud like Brittany, not attention-seek like Kayla Monroe. Rachel mostly stayed in the background during parties and events. Dalton remembered her as observant, quiet, in the way genuinely attentive people often were. She contacted us directly, Dalton asked. Yes. Why? A short pause followed. Because apparently, she's tired of lying for Vanessa. Dalton stared toward the apartment window silently. The rain outside thickened slightly. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to disappointment instead of exhaustion. Because witnesses changed things. Witnesses meant the private version of events was beginning to surface. And once that happened, the marriage would stop feeling complicated. It would simply become documented. At 9:06 a.m., Rachel Sloan arrived at Graham Pike's office downtown, wearing a tan wool coat and carrying a leather folder against her chest. She looked nervous, not dramatic, not emotional, just uncomfortable. Dalton remained in the adjacent conference room, while Graham conducted the initial interview privately. That was intentional. Graham preferred witnesses speak freely, without emotional pressure. Through the closed office door, Dalton could hear only muted conversation and occasional page-turning. He sat quietly beside the conference table, reviewing logistics reports from Clear Lane without actually reading them. His mind kept drifting elsewhere, backward, to smaller moments he once ignored. Rachel leaving parties early, while Vanessa stayed for photos. Rachel watching arguments silently during dinners. Rachel once asking Dalton quietly, "You ever get tired of being treated like a joke?" At the time, he brushed it off. Now he wondered how much she had noticed. At 10:11 a.m., Graham finally opened the conference room door. "Come in." Rachel stood near the office bookshelf, looking exhausted already. Dalton nodded politely once. She returned the gesture carefully. No one hugged. No one pretended this situation was normal. Graham closed the door behind them. Then he spoke plainly. "Rachel is prepared to provide sworn testimony." Dalton sat down slowly across from her. Rachel clasped her hands tightly together. "I didn't know things would go this far," she said quietly. Dalton answered honestly, "Neither did I." Rachel looked down briefly before continuing. "The divorce party wasn't spontaneous. Graham began taking notes immediately. Rachel explained everything carefully. Vanessa planned the event nearly 3 weeks earlier. The goal wasn't emotional closure. It was visibility, attention, engagement, potential viral growth. She kept saying people love humiliation stories online, Rachel said quietly. Dalton felt something cold settle deeper into place inside him. Not anger, confirmation. Rachel continued. Brittany thought the broke warehouse husband angle would trend. Graham wrote another note. Did Vanessa know the briefcase contained company documents? Rachel nodded immediately. Yes. The room went still. Dalton watched her carefully. Rachel met his eyes directly this time. She asked me if the paperwork looked important enough for the camera. A long silence followed. That last sentence mattered enormously, not because it changed Dalton emotionally, because it changed intent legally. Graham leaned forward slightly. Can you testify to that? Under oath, yes. No uncertainty. No. Rachel reached into her folder and removed printed screenshots. Private messages. Planning conversations. One message from Vanessa read, "If Dalton wants to act mysterious, maybe I'll make his fake businessman act useful for once." Another message followed beneath it from Brittany. Use the briefcase. That'll make people ask questions. Dalton stared at the screenshots silently. The room felt strangely quiet around him. Rachel spoke more softly now. I should have stopped it. Dalton looked at her. You didn't post the videos. No, she admitted. But I laughed at them. That honesty mattered. Because unlike everyone else involved, Rachel no longer sounded interested in protecting herself, only telling the truth. At 11:02 a.m., Graham reviewed the messages carefully before setting them aside. This changes trial posture significantly, he said. Rachel exhaled shakily. I'm sorry. Dalton considered the apology for several seconds, then answered honestly. I believe you. That surprised her slightly. You do? Yes. Because Dalton understood something clearly now. People followed Vanessa's behavior for different reasons. Some wanted attention. Some wanted entertainment. Some simply wanted to belong near confidence. But very few actually understood the damage being created. At 11:27 a.m., Rachel prepared to leave. Before reaching the door, she stopped. There's something else, she said quietly. Graham looked up immediately. Rachel hesitated briefly. Vanessa knew you were important before the party. Dalton frowned slightly. What do you mean? She found some of the acquisition paperwork earlier that week. The room went silent. Again. Rachel continued carefully. She didn't understand all of it, but she knew you owned part of the company. Dalton stared at her. That changed everything emotionally, not legally. Emotionally. Because until that moment, Dalton still believed Vanessa acted mostly out of ignorance and ego. Now, another possibility appeared, that she knew enough to understand he mattered and mocked him publicly anyway. When did she find the documents, Graham asked. About 4 days before the party. Dalton looked down slowly at the conference table. The memory surfaced immediately. Vanessa asking strangely specific questions about Buckeye Freight Capital. Vanessa suddenly asking whether Clearlane actually made money. At the time, he thought she was finally becoming interested in his work. Now he understood differently. Rachel spoke one final time before leaving. She thought embarrassing you publicly would force you to stop hiding things. Dalton almost smiled at the irony, because Vanessa spent years accusing him of hiding ambition while quietly building the biggest thing in his life. After Rachel left the office, remained silent for nearly a full minute, then Graham closed the witness folder carefully. "Well," he said quietly, "that's devastating." Dalton leaned back slowly in his chair, not triumphant, not relieved, just drained, because the final pieces were settling into place now. The marriage, the party, the live streams, the cruelty. None of it had been impulsive. It had been planned, structured, intended for public consumption. That realization hurt more than the insults ever did. At 12:16 p.m., Graham began organizing new filings, witness affidavits, supplemental evidence, message authentication requests. Dalton watched quietly, while papers moved from one folder into another. Systems processing consequences again. Outside rain continued falling across downtown Columbus. His phone buzzed once. A message from Noah Bennett. "You okay?" Dalton stared at it for several seconds before replying. "Not really. But I'm clear now." Noah responded almost immediately. "That's usually worse." Yes, it was. Because clarity removed hope. At 1:04 p.m., Martin Keller requested an emergency private conference call with Graham Pike. That alone told Dalton everything. Vanessa's legal team understood what Rachel's testimony meant. The case was collapsing. Not publicly, structurally. Graham muted the call briefly and looked toward Dalton. They want to discuss revised settlement terms. Dalton stared out the office window at the wet city below. Cars moved through intersections. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Ordinary life continuing while years of marriage reduced themselves into exhibits and sworn statements. What changed, Dalton asked quietly, even though he already knew. Graham capped his pen slowly. They finally realized evidence doesn't care about feelings. The final settlement meeting lasted less than 90 minutes. After weeks of online chaos, court hearings, witness statements, and legal filings, the end arrived quietly, inside a conference room overlooking rainy downtown Columbus. No cameras waited outside. No live streams, no audience, just signatures. At 2:08 p.m., Dalton sat beside Graham Pike at the same polished conference table where negotiations had previously collapsed. Only now, the atmosphere felt different, quieter, heavier. Across from him, Vanessa Holloway Diaz looked exhausted, in a way makeup could no longer hide. Not dramatic exhaustion, real exhaustion, sleepless nights, public backlash, attorney invoices, the slow realization that internet attention disappeared long before consequences did. Martin Keller opened a thick folder carefully. "My client is prepared to accept revised settlement terms." Graham nodded once, without visible reaction. Evelyn Mercer sat farther down the table, reviewing corporate release documents with precise attention. No wasted movement, no emotional engagement. Dalton appreciated that about her. She never treated legal systems like personal weapons, only structures. Vanessa stared silently at the stack of papers in front of her. The settlement terms had changed significantly after Rachel Sloane's testimony. Permanent removal of all remaining defamatory content. Formal correction statement regarding Dalton's role at Clear Lane Systems. Confirmation that no company materials remained in Vanessa's possession. Financial offsets connected to undisclosed debt accumulation. Limited spousal adjustment payment. No access to protected Clear Lane equity structures. The language felt clinical, cold. Years of marriage reduced to numbered paragraphs and signature lines. Outside the conference room windows, rain rolled slowly down the glass, while downtown traffic moved beneath gray skies. Dalton watched the weather briefly, not the paperwork, because emotionally the decision had already happened weeks earlier. This meeting only documented it. Martin spoke carefully. My client requests mutual non-disparagement moving forward. Graham responded calmly. Mr. Diaz has not publicly disparaged Ms. Holloway Diaz at any point. Silence. That statement hung awkwardly in the room, because everyone knew it was true. Dalton never posted, never retaliated online, never mocked Vanessa publicly. The internet had punished her mostly by discovering context. At 2:24 p.m., Evelyn slid one final page toward Vanessa. The correction statement, she said. Vanessa read the page silently. Her jaw tightened slightly. Halfway through, the statement was short, professional. No dramatic apology, just facts. That certain social media posts misrepresented Dalton Diaz's professional role. That confidential materials were displayed irresponsibly. That public assumptions about his financial position were inaccurate. Simple, controlled, true. Vanessa looked up slowly. You really need this, Evelyn answered, without emotion. Clear Lane Systems requires factual correction regarding corporate exposure. Again, the distinction mattered. Not Dalton, the company. Systems instead of feelings. Vanessa looked toward Dalton. You're okay with this? Dalton met her eyes for several seconds before answering. I'm okay with ending this correctly. The sentence seemed to hit her harder than anger would have, because it sounded final. No hidden emotion beneath it. No revenge. No desire to hurt her. Only closure. At 2:41 p.m., the actual signing began, one document after another. Property division, debt allocation, disclosure acknowledgments, electronic preservation compliance, civil release language. Vanessa signed slower as the stack grew thinner. Dalton signed steadily. Not rushed, not hesitant. Just done. Halfway through the process, Martin paused beside one section involving financial offsets. Vanessa frowned while reviewing the numbers. That much, Graham folded his hands calmly. The court would likely calculate significantly more exposure during extended litigation. Vanessa looked away immediately. She understood now. The settlement was not harsh. It was controlled damage. That realization showed clearly on her face. At 3:03 p.m., only one document remained unsigned. The final marital dissolution agreement. Vanessa stared at the signature line for a long time. Dalton watched quietly. Not impatient, not emotional. His mind drifted briefly to older memories again. Snow falling outside their first apartment in Cleveland years earlier. Cheap takeout dinners. Vanessa laughing genuinely before social media slowly became the center of her identity. He remembered believing back then that ordinary life would always be enough for both of them. Maybe it had been once. Maybe not. Eventually, Vanessa picked up the pen, then stopped again. "You really hid all of this from me," she said quietly. The room remained still. Dalton answered honestly. "No," he said. "I built it quietly." Vanessa looked down at the papers again. "You could have told me." Dalton considered that for several seconds. "I tried," he replied softly. And that was the truth. Not loudly, not dramatically, but there had been moments, conversations, late-night explanations about long-term planning and ownership structures. Vanessa simply stopped listening whenever success didn't arrive fast enough to impress other people. At 3:11 p.m., Vanessa finally signed. Martin signed next, then Graham, then Dalton. The sound of pen against paper felt strangely small, considering how much damage surrounded the process. Evelyn collected the finalized documents carefully into organized folders. "That concludes the corporate portion," she said calmly. No celebration followed. No relief visible anywhere. Only completion. At 3:18 p.m., the meeting ended. Chairs moved quietly, folders closed. Attorneys discussed filing timelines and compliance confirmations. Vanessa remained seated a little longer than everyone else. Dalton stood near the conference room windows, adjusting his jacket slowly. Rain still covered Columbus in gray reflection. He heard footsteps approach behind him. Vanessa stopped beside him without speaking at first. For several seconds, both simply watched the city below. Then she spoke quietly. "I didn't think you'd become this." Dalton kept his eyes on the rain outside. "I was always this." Vanessa swallowed slightly. The silence after that felt heavier than any argument they ever had, because both understood the real tragedy now. Dalton had spent years becoming someone stable, disciplined, and valuable. Vanessa simply stopped respecting anything that grew slowly. At 3:26 p.m., she asked one final question. "Do you hate me?" Dalton looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No." And again, it was true. Hatred required emotional energy he no longer carried. What remained instead was distance. Permanent distance. Vanessa nodded once slowly. That answer hurt her more than anger probably would have, because anger still meant attachment. This felt like release. At 3:34 p.m., Dalton exited the building alone. Cold rain hit his face immediately as he stepped onto the sidewalk outside. Traffic lights reflected across wet pavement while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas along Broad Street. His old Ford F-150 waited near the curb exactly where he parked it earlier. Same faded blue paint, same squeaking passenger door, same truck, Vanessa mocked publicly. Dalton unlocked it slowly, then paused. For several seconds he stood beside the driver's side door, listening to the rain hit metal rooftops and passing cars. His wedding ring still rested on his finger, the last physical piece of a life already gone. He removed it carefully, not dramatically. No speech, no tears, just quiet acceptance. Then he opened the glove compartment and placed the ring inside beside old insurance papers and a flashlight. The compartment closed with a soft click. Dalton sat behind the wheel and started the engine. The truck rumbled alive beneath him. Outside, Columbus continued moving like nothing significant had happened. But Dalton understood something clearly now. Justice rarely arrived loudly. Most of the time, it arrived through paperwork, patience, evidence, and people finally being forced to face reality without filters. His phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. A message from Noah Bennett. "You free tomorrow? Cincinnati office wants you there early." Dalton stared at the message briefly, then put the truck in drive. Rain blurred the city lights ahead as he pulled slowly into traffic. And for the first time in months, the silence around him finally felt peaceful. 6 months later, Dalton Diaz still drove the same faded blue Ford F-150. The passenger side door still squeaked. The heater still took too long to warm up during cold mornings. And every weekday before sunrise, Dalton still stopped at the same gas station outside Cincinnati to buy black coffee before work. Success had changed his schedule, not his habits. At 6:14 a.m., the Ohio River reflected pale orange light beneath the interstate bridge, while Dalton drove toward Clear Lane Systems' new regional headquarters downtown. The company had grown quickly after the Buckeye Freight partnership. New contracts, new offices, new investors. People now recognized Dalton in industry circles. Transportation conferences invited him to speak. Business magazines requested interviews. He declined most of them because attention still felt temporary to him. Systems mattered longer. The Cincinnati office occupied 4 renovated floors inside an old manufacturing building near the riverfront. Exposed brick walls, mixed with glass conference rooms, and massive freight monitoring screens, tracking shipment routes across the Midwest. Employees greeted Dalton respectfully when he entered. "Morning, Mr. Diaz." "Morning." "Hey, Dalton." Nothing dramatic, just steady respect built quietly over time. That mattered more to him than internet attention ever could. At 6:37 a.m., Dalton stepped into conference room C, carrying a thermos and a stack of compliance reports. A young analyst named Trevor Mills already sat there reviewing spreadsheets nervously. 26 years old. Sharp mind, cheap suit, constantly underestimated. Dalton noticed it immediately because he recognized the posture. Trevor stood quickly. "Sorry, I thought this room was open." "It is," Dalton replied. Trevor relaxed slightly. Dalton sat across from him and reviewed the screen silently for a moment. Freight routing compliance models, insurance exposure tracking, regulatory timing projections. Trevor's work was good, careful, detailed. But several notes in the margins revealed insecurity, over-explaining, apologizing inside professional comments, trying too hard to sound important. Dalton remembered doing that years earlier. Not because he lacked intelligence, because people dismissed quiet men before hearing them fully. "You built this model?" Dalton asked. Trevor nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." Dalton studied another page. "How long?" "About 3 weeks. It should have taken 2. Trevor's face tightened immediately. Then Dalton added calmly, "Which means you checked everything twice." "That's good." Trevor looked surprised. Dalton closed the folder. "Stop apologizing in your notes." Another surprised look. "You noticed that?" "Yes." Trevor looked down awkwardly. "People keep saying I need to sound more confident." Dalton leaned back slightly. "Confidence isn't volume." The sentence hung quietly. In the room, Trevor nodded slowly, then asked carefully, "How do you get people to take you seriously, Dalton?" Almost smiled at that. Because 6 months earlier, the internet had laughed at him publicly. Now, young employees studied him for advice. Funny how quickly perception changed once titles appeared beside a name. "You don't force it," Dalton answered. "You become difficult to ignore." Trevor absorbed the sentence silently. At 8:11 a.m., Noah Bennett entered carrying a tablet and coffee. "There you are," he said. Board call moved to 9. Dalton nodded once. Noah noticed Trevor immediately. You surviving Trevor laughed, nervously, trying. Noah grinned. "That's all any of us are doing." After Trevor left, Noah sat across from Dalton quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Noah slid the tablet across the table. An article remained open on screen. Vanessa Holloway issues final public correction regarding Clear Lane incident. Dalton looked away almost immediately. Noah noticed. "You didn't watch it?" "No, you should." Dalton shook his head once. "I already know what happened." And he did. The correction statement had gone live 3 nights earlier. Short video. No makeup, heavy lighting. No dramatic music. No performance. Just Vanessa, acknowledging that previous public statements about Dalton and Clear Lane systems were inaccurate. Comments beneath the video ranged from cruel to sympathetic. Dalton never opened them. Because eventually, he understood something important. The internet only knew pieces of people, never for the full weight of the them. At 9:26 a.m., Dalton stood inside the executive boardroom overlooking the river, while presentations filled giant screens around him. Freight expansion numbers, compliance projections, operational growth charts. The company continued moving forward. That part felt good, not exciting, solid, like building foundations instead of fireworks. During a break between presentations, Evelyn Mercer approached quietly beside the coffee station. "You look less tired," she observed. Dalton considered that. Maybe. Evelyn stirred cream into her coffee slowly. "You know, most people would have tried to destroy her publicly by now." Dalton looked through the boardroom windows toward slow-moving barges on the river. That wouldn't fix anything. Evelyn nodded once. Still, most people would have wanted revenge. Dalton thought carefully before answering. She already lost what she actually cared about. Attention, image, control of the narrative. The legal system didn't need Dalton's emotions to punish those things. Reality handled it naturally. At 11:02 a.m., Dalton finally took lunch alone on the rooftop terrace outside the office. Cold wind moved across the river while downtown Cincinnati traffic drifted below. He opened a simple takeout container from a nearby deli. Turkey sandwich, pasta salad, nothing expensive. His phone buzzed once beside the table. A text from an unknown number. For a second, Dalton considered ignoring it, then opened the message. It was from Vanessa. Not emotional, not manipulative, only one sentence. You were right about quiet things growing slowly. Dalton stared at the message for several seconds. No apology followed it. No request. No attempt to reopen conversation. Just recognition. He locked the screen without replying. Not cruelly, simply because there was nothing left to say. Some relationships ended loudly. Others ended long before paperwork caught up. At 1:14 p.m., Trevor approached the rooftop carefully, holding another folder. Sorry, he said. Quick question about the freight audit structure. Dalton gestured toward the chair beside him. Trevor sat down and opened the documents nervously. Halfway through the explanation, he stopped himself. Sorry, I'm rambling. Dalton shook his head slightly. No. You're thinking carefully. The younger man relaxed again. Dalton watched him for a moment, then remembered the divorce party videos. The laughter, the comments mocking ordinary-looking men. Warehouse energy. Average husband, invisible worker. Funny how often people confused quietness with lack of value. Dalton understood now that the real danger of being underestimated was not humiliation. It was isolation. People stopped seeing you clearly once they believed you were small. But sometimes that invisibility became protection. Time to build quietly. Time to prepare. Time to become stronger before anyone noticed. At 5:42 p.m., Dalton left the office, carrying only his thermos and laptop bag. The sun was beginning to set over the Ohio River, casting long orange reflections across downtown streets. His old Ford waited exactly where he parked it that morning. Still imperfect. Still reliable. He climbed inside and started the engine. The truck rumbled softly beneath him. Another email notification appeared on his phone screen. New logistics contract approved. Another expansion. More growth. Dalton silenced the notification without opening it. Then he drove slowly toward the interstate, while evening light stretched across the river behind him. No cameras followed him now. No headlines, no live streams. Just quiet road noise and fading sunlight through the windshield. And for the first time in years, Dalton no longer felt misunderstood. He simply felt free. Some people mistake silence for weakness because they only respect what they can immediately see. But real strength is often quiet. It looks like long nights. Nobody applauds discipline. Nobody notices. And patience that keeps building while the world laughs too early. Dalton never won because he shouted louder. He won because he stayed calm, long enough for the truth to stand on its own. This story is also a reminder that public attention can disappear overnight but character stays. Social media can create narratives, but evidence still matters. Systems still matter. Integrity still matters. And sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are carrying responsibilities, pressure, and dreams far bigger than anyone around them realizes. If you've ever been underestimated, mocked, ignored, or treated like you would never become more than your current situation, remember this: not everyone needs to announce their future while they're building it. Quiet progress is still progress. And when the time finally comes, the truth usually speaks for itself. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and share where you're watching from and what part hit you the hardest. And if you enjoy deep stories about betrayal, resilience, quiet revenge, and people rebuilding themselves the right way, subscribe to the channel now. Tomorrow's story might stay with you even longer.